Hi, class. John here. Good to see everybody again. Uh, this week's discussion I'm doing on the Scopes trial. The Scopes trial was based off of legislation that was passed in Tennessee that was called the Butler Act. And this was a piece of legislation that was lobbied heavily by a gentleman named John Washington Butler, who was the head of the Christian Fundamentals Association. And essentially, this was a piece of legislation that uh, forbade, completely prohibited the teaching of evolution in Tennessee schools. And it was an interesting controversy because it was this very dramatic and passion-filled debate between strict Christian fundamentalists and more of the progressive modern uh, individuals in Tennessee. And it was a major newsworthy act that happened. And the teacher or the defendant was John T. Scopes. And he actually never truly is believed to have taught specifically evolution, but he basically gave himself up for the cause and stood up and was kind of the um, individual who fell on the sword on behalf of those who felt like the legislation was almost a step too far in Christian doctrine being pushed in Tennessee schools. Um, Really interesting because the primary sources that I found, one of them was for the New York Times, which obviously is a major media organization. And the title of this article was Bryan and Dayton calls Scopes trial duel to the death. Quote, if evolution wins, he declares Christianity goes, end quote. He goes on to say, quote, for both cannot survive. Sees the Bible at stake trying to destroy it, he asserts, on evidence that would not convict a habitual criminal, end quote. So interesting to think that there was this major internal struggle in people thinking that if public schools somehow, in the slightest way, contradicted the Bible's teachings, and not necessarily the belief of all who read the Bible or practice religion, but this specific creationism based on the book of Genesis, that all of Christianity will go down with it. And this fervor was seen really kind of across the country. And a really interesting note for this was that the trial itself was not necessarily based in fact. Scopes himself never is truly believed to have taught explicit evolution, but he felt strongly about the fact that the uh, the overreach of this legislation was so out of touch that he kind of stood up and sacrificed himself for the cause that he believed in, and that this legislation was a step too far. Another very interesting part is William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow. William Jennings Bryan being a politician, and Clarence Darrow being obviously a very well-known lawyer, were both at ends different during this trial. Clarence Darrow was the defense, and William Jennings Bryan called on to essentially prosecute the case. But as the case went through Tennessee court, the Tennessee eventually repealed the law because a very similar case had hit the United States Supreme Court, and in essence deemed the overreach of the legislation as unconstitutional. This was a really interesting topic to kind of dive into. There's a really interesting book called The Scopes Monkey Trial, which is also another name for this, kind of like a colloquial term where Scopes had said that he didn't teach all the quote monkey business, end quote. Um, Certainly more worth than my time on the discussion, but I really thought this was an interesting piece, given how charged and passionate people were on kind of this zero-sum game or this all or nothing belief that if if the anything had been uh, even the slightest hint of against a biblical teaching that somehow all of Christianity would be subject to failure in the eyes of some of these people who consider themselves Christian fundamentalists. Anyways, I look forward to watching and reading other comments. Thanks.